Always consult a medical professional when making decisions about your health. The following is based on personal experience, consultations, and research, but should not take the place of medical advice. We encourage you to consult with your local STI health clinic about safer sex protocols.
Hi, I'm Greg.
And I'm Leanne.
Welcome to the Empowered Poly Podcast, where we give you the tools to help you feel more empowered
in your polyamorous and consensually non-monogamous relationships
by sharing what we've learned as relationship coaches and as individuals.
Empowered Poly is LGBTQ2IA+, alternative lifestyle, and kink-friendly.
Thank you for joining us,
and enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome to episode number 27. Today we're going to talk about safer sex. And I'm going to do this one, I think, a little bit differently in that I'm going to be doing a lot of asking questions, and Leanne's going to be doing a lot of answering those questions because she's got quite a bit. She's a wealth of knowledge in the subject, and I am feeling actually a bit under the weather. So I've had a nasty bit of a cold or something going on. So I'm going to be a little bit quieter than normal. And I know that probably upsets some of you, and I'm sorry. Just kidding. So I guess we'll get started. Let's start with what we mean by safer sex. So I'll kind of open that up and start off by asking you that question. What does safer sex mean to you?
Well, the tricky bit about sex is that the only safe sex, truly safe sex, is no sex at all. And so we can't really have safe sex. And that's just sort of the reality that we're living in, right? That's been the reality for many, 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 many hundreds, thousands of years. Nothing new, but people are still kind of wrapping their heads around it. So when we talk about this subject, we use the term safer rather than safe.
Gotcha. So in other words, the only safe sex that you can have is to just not have sex at all or have sex with yourself.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Good point.
Yeah. Right. But even that's not safe depending upon what kind of kinks you might be into. But anyway, that's beside the point.
That's another episode.
Yeah, totally. Another episode. So the idea here isn't to try to talk about safe sex. It's to try to talk about ways that we can have safer sex. Also, too, I think what's really important to discuss is destigmatizing STIs, what were sexually transmitted infections. And so one of the things that comes up for me around destigmatizing STIs is the language that we use. You'll notice that I just said sexually transmitted infection. A lot of the language is still, and this is language within the professional and medical communities, is still using STD, which is sexually transmitted disease. And disease has a different implication than infection, right? Because oftentimes, and we'll get into a little bit more about this, but oftentimes these infections, the STIs that we do get are actually just infections and can be relatively easily cured and easily treated, rather. Sorry, not cured, but treated. And so I think the language around how we talk about this goes a long way to destigmatizing it. What do you think about that?
You know, it's funny in the polyamory and consensually non-monogamous communities, there is a lot of talk around having the need for safer sex and being a sex positive community, and yet I'm very shocked and dismayed sometimes by how people conduct themselves or don't know what to do to protect themselves and their partners. And this is all part of, addressing your sexual health, right? And I think you were going to speak to that. Am I right about that?
Yeah. So I guess what you're asking is what do we mean by sexual health, right?
Well, the destigmatization, I think, is part of the sexual health piece, because if we're using terminology or adopting attitudes about STIs that are harsh, judgmental, and harmful, really, we can, you know, really undermine sexual health of the community, of ourselves, of our partners. And if we can step out of the judgment and just accept that STIs are part of the landscape that we're navigating, right? And that we make decisions accordingly. Um, and that, we try to find our common ground with our partners and work within those. That contributes to sexual health. So maybe talk about what sexual health is.
Right. Well, my understanding of sexual health is basically it's a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality.
Mm.
It's also, it's also showing up in a responsible, safe way that provides for a satisfying sexual experience. And so that's
Mhm.
my understanding of the overall sort of idea
And
behind.
I would just add in there consensual, satisfying and consensual, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Because one of the
Responsible,
things,
safe, consensual, satisfying. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
yeah, one of the things that comes up for me often is disclosure issues with clients, whereby they're even asking, do I need to tell my partners that I have this STI or that I've had it? Um, for me, every decision that someone makes around their sexual health needs to be fully informed consent, and we can't make any decisions that are fully informed unless we have all the information. So I'm a big proponent of disclosure, um, and I myself have an STI, so I am always disclosing it. I'm always talking about it. It didn't it wasn't that easy in the beginning, for sure. I would get embarrassed and have some personal judgment around it. Um, but since I've had it now for 19 years, I'm much more relaxed about having it and having those conversations. I don't get as uptight. So, yeah.
Cool. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. We'll get into your personal story in a minute, but what I think we should start with is, so what are some of the other things that we can do to help destigmatize STIs?
Having those conversations, making it normal to discuss safer sex protocols, making it normal to get regular testing if that's available to you. Sometimes it's a bit of a uh, financial barrier for people, depending on where you live, or even it can be difficult to get in for a test if you're in a rural area, for example, um, and you have small children and you don't drive. Like there's all these kinds of things that are to be considered. But, you know, um, the recommendation for testing is that you get regularly tested if you have multiple partners or you are partnered with someone who has multiple partners. And regular means quarterly, and that means every 3 months. So that's pretty frequent for some people. And if you have to pay for it, it can get costly, right? So considering that recommendation, think about where are you on the scale in terms of risk? Where are your partners on the scale in terms of risk? And make your testing decisions based on that. I know someone who gets tested every month because they have multiple sexual partners, their partners have multiple sexual partners, and they don't ever want to miss anything and not be able to treat it. Um, and by treat, I mean manage them because many of them can be treated with um, antibiotics and they'll go away. And then there's some that won't go away, but they can still be treated and managed. So, yeah.
So what you're saying is to normalize the conversations, or
Yeah,
to have, well, to have the conversations in an effort to normalize it.
absolutely.
Right. One of
Give the opportunity for disclosure also in those conversations without judgment, right? If you're being curious about someone's sexual history and status in a non-judgmental way with an open mind and the ability to kind of traverse that landscape if it comes up, like say they say yes, actually I do have something, then you can have reasonable conversation around it rather than just ghosting them or hanging up on them or leaving the date. stay present and learn something about it. Maybe there's something you don't know yet, and maybe there's something that can be done so that you can still have, intimate relations with this person in a way that you feel safe, right?
Right. Yeah. Good points. Really good points. I think creating that safe space for both people to open up, or all
Yeah.
people rather, to open up, depending upon your preferred relationship structure. I think it's also important to understand too that this information applies not just to people who identify as non-monogamous, but this applies to
Hmm.
people who are monogamous. Because, as we know, in the monogamous world, there are there are people that practice non-consensual non-monogamy. There are people
Hmm.
out there who are having affairs. There are people out there who aren't being honest and forthright. And so if you suspect that your partner is one of those people, or you suspect you find yourself in a situation where you might be, wanting to be one of those people, then I would suggest that you act accordingly in terms of your testing protocols. Because
Hmm.
one of the things that really comes up for me, and I'm going to do my best to explain this, is that one of the things that I hear a lot of people in the monogamous landscape say about non-monogamy is that, well, it's rife with the STIs, right? Your exposure is increased, tenfold, et cetera, et cetera, and so therefore you're more likely to get STIs. Well, in fact, it's actually not the case, because there's so much more awareness
Hmm.
in the non-monogamous community around safer sex protocols.
Hmm.
Whereas in the monogamous community, there are people, and I'm not saying all monogamous people do this, but I'm saying that not people who identify as monogamous, if you're going off and you're having an affair with somebody, well, you're not going to be transparent about that. And
Right.
so you're
Even if you
getting
have symptoms, even if you go get tested and have a positive result, and you may avoid testing so that you kind of have the blinders on and you don't know, right?
or you just simply don't know. You just
Hmm.
simply don't have the information available to be able to make an educated decision that keeps yourself and your partners safer, right? You
Hmm.
just simply don't know, because it's not something that's talked about in the monogamous world, because we don't think they have to talk about it, because I'm with one person and I'm with that person for the rest of my life, so I'm already safe. The reality is that we're never safe unless, again, we're only having sex with ourselves, right?
Well, and that extends to the medical community too. Your doctor seeing on your file that you're married will probably not bring up STI testing to you, right? Whereas if they know that you're polyamorous, they will, right? So it's a different conversation with the medical community, and making sure that you um, bring awareness to the truth of our statistics, and that your partner may have also contracted something before you even met them that is now still in their system, right? Unfortunately, there is imperfect testing out there, and so we can't rely on testing entirely. And so that's where our safer sex protocols also come in. So,
Absolutely, and we'll get into protocols in a minute too. And something just occurred to me actually too. I think one of the ways that we can help to normalize the conversations around STI testing is to encourage our doctors, the medical community, to do exactly what you've just said, which is to ask everybody, regardless of their preferred relationship dynamic or preferred relationship structures, right?
mhm.
Make that part of the conversation, right? When was the last time you got an STI test? Do you have any concerns about? Is there anything that you need, to be aware of? Do you potentially have any, symptoms that you might want to talk about in regards to that, right? Because there's a ton of shame around it, right? And there's a ton
Mhm.
of shame around the idea of not being the idea of having to be transparent and communicate that information, because then that gets into slut shaming and sex shaming and all of that other stuff, right? Because the idea is that the thought is rather is that, well, if you have an STI, then you must be a slut because you're having too much sex, and that's not at all true.
Mm-mm.
Not at all true, right? You
No,
could have sex with one person for your entire life and still get an STI.
right.
It's just the nature of the world, and it just happens, right?
Well, and some of these
Like you said,
STIs
some of
are transmitted through very benign behaviors such as kissing, which we even do with family members. So, herpes is a fine example of that, right?
Mhm.
So doctors don't even consider herpes and HPV as a sexually transmitted infection, really. They put it into the same umbrella of terms just so that people will be aware that it's out there, but also, the high rates and the inability to kind of keep on top of the transmission makes it kind of unwieldy for doctors, and so they won't even test for those things in a regular um, STI testing panel, right? So yeah, having the conversations ongoing with everyone, your partners, your medical practitioners, and then educating yourself. There's so much education available to us, and to me, there is onus upon each one of us as sexual beings who are practicing to get out there and learn about it and not just rely on our doctors. Our doctors may not even know everything. And, I recommend if you have an STI clinic in your community, go there rather than to your GP for information, because I found even with general practitioners, there is some bias, like you were saying, and and lack of information, and sometimes incorrect information. So yeah, I would say head to your STI clinic if that's available to you, and go online. Trusted resources online. So you're looking for, truly medical um, sites, not sort of like the ones that have the, I don't know what, it's clickbait, right? Where it's like next, 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 15 things you need to know about herpes. Um,
Just
was
be,
written
just be,
by a layman usually,
yeah.
Yeah.
Just be careful though when you go to those sites because we talked about language a few minutes ago. While I was researching for this episode, I came across several well-respected medical sites that are still using the term disease to describe STIs. So,
Well, now there's kind of a pendulum swing back toward the middle of the road where that's concerned, where there was a huge push um, about a decade ago where people were like, they're infections, they're not diseases. And now they're saying, well, there's different criteria that falls under the name disease that some of the STIs actually meet. And so, is it, isn't it, does it matter? To me, it doesn't matter if somebody calls it an STD. I don't take that personally. I don't take it as a reflection upon me that I have a disease rather than an infection. Um, and diseases are usually transmissible, and so that's one of the things that's the criteria for the name, right?
so are infections.
Um, yes, not all infections are transmissible though, and that's why I mean, it's a interchangeable, I think, at this point, where people really do have the use of either term at this point. Nurses are using STD, for example.
I personally think that STI resonates more with me, and that's a term that I would use instead of disease, because I think disease has that shame element to it. It has that stigma attached to it, and I think that
Sure. Yeah.
and yeah. So for me, I would use STI.
Yeah. I
But
think I
but
think that's I think
interestingly,
that core piece though, the piece about disease being shameful, is a problem that should be addressed. And so if we reclaim the word and normalize it, it's not so bad, right? It's kind of like, when we do our slut walks and we reclaim the word, right? Like if you're going to call me a slut, I'm going to claim it and make it my own, right?
it's a good
So
point.
there's some movement going on regarding that. I personally don't care. I know people who do, like yourself, and I would ask people, if you want to be kind and compassionate to them, just say, what term do you use? You know?
Let's start. Maybe talk about a bit about your history because you mentioned earlier that you do have herpes. So let's talk a bit about that and your history around it and your
Sure.
understanding of it.
Okay. Um, So 19 years ago, I had a partner who did not know that he had herpes. There was apparently some indication of, something that looked like maybe an ingrown hair at one point that really wasn't problematic, that went away on its own really quickly and never thought of again. Um, I was the first partner that he had passed it on to, and he didn't pass it on to anybody else after that, to my knowledge. So it was a bit of a shock to both of us. Um, he also had oral herpes. Which I'll talk about the difference between oral and genital in a second. So the tricky bit there is that I was diagnosed with HSV2, which is typically known as genital herpes because it typically likes to be in the genital, anal, or thighs or buttocks areas. So it's not even genital, right? So it's an unfortunate nickname. It's incorrect in terms of its accuracy. And you can get HSV2 on your mouth. And so my partner had had cold sores all of his life. I assumed, and he assumed, that that was not the genital type, right? Unfortunately, because HSV2 does transfer to the mouth, it's impossible to know. If you get cold sores, unless you get your sores swabbed and tested, you won't know which type you have. They behave the same way. The only difference is that HSV2 tends to want to reside in the lower regions, and HSV1 tends to reside in the mouth. And you can get both in your eyes, in your nose. So what I'm saying is the terminology around HSV1, 2, and oral or genital is really not that useful. And so the treatment is the same. The treatment is, manage symptoms and use antivirals to reduce the amount of outbreaks and shedding that you have. Shedding occurs whether you have a sore or not, but particularly when you have one coming up. And so shedding is very common in terms of, transmission. But what we find is that transmission generally occurs when somebody doesn't know they have it and they're not medicated, or they do know they have it and they don't care and they don't disclose, right? So they think it's not a big deal. Nobody needs to know. I'm just going to behave as if I don't have it. Now, the reason that that comes up for people, I understand. I totally get it. I'm just not one of those people. But the reason it comes up for people is because it's so common. 80% of the population has either HSV1 or HSV2. We know those statistics. Those are the ones that have been reported, right? So the assumption is there's more people on the planet, even than that, who have it. So if 4 out of 5 people in a room that you're going to, want to partner with potentially, right? Let's say you're at an event, right? You're looking for partners. If 4 out of 5 people there have it, the likelihood of you encountering it in your intimacy is high. Then on top of that, because both go both places, it doesn't really matter what type they have. And on top of that, if they are aware that they have it and they are medicating, that will reduce their shed, that will reduce their outbreaks, and they will be probably listening to their body a lot more than normal people do, right? People who don't have it, or people who don't know that they have it. Because the people that don't know that they have it will get the same symptoms, they just will ignore them or chalk them up to something else. So even my story, when I was first diagnosed, I went to the STI clinic for diagnosis because my bikini area was very bumpy and very itchy after shaving. And the nurse even said, that looks like a shaving rash. I don't think that that's anything to worry about. And I said, well, it's really itchy. Could we just test? And she did, and it came back positive. And this nurse has HSV herself. And so she was even somebody who was aware of it and had it herself and seen outbreaks many times and worked in an STI clinic, had studied it, and was confused when she came across mine initially as to what it was. She didn't identify it visually. So a lot of people are in that same boat, much like my partner who just thought, hey, ingrown hair, no big deal, right? Um, the other symptoms are like flu-like symptoms, which is very common among a lot of STIs. How many times do we wake up feeling kind of crappy? We're crappy for a few days and it goes away. Many, many times. Yeah. So flu-like symptoms come up for lots of different STIs. And it's one of the first things that, we need to talk about with our practitioners if we're concerned, if we have reason to feel like we might be in a high risk category, or that we have enough, you know, um, risk going on either with ourselves or with our partners that we need to get checked. And doctors will also poo-poo that. They'll say, "Oh, you're just not feeling well. It's nothing to worry about. We don't need to run tests, you know." And I understand their thinking as well. They don't want to test every little thing because, people it's expensive and it just jams up the system, and people who actually need testing don't get it in time, et cetera, et cetera. All the arguments are there. But if we're doing regular quarterly testing, or for some people they do less, they do it, bi-quarterly or once a year, that's reasonable given, what you're comfortable with and what your risk level is at, right? My comfort level is I get tested every 3 months, pretty
It's
much like
also,
clockwork.
I think it's also reasonable too. I mean, we're lucky enough that we live in a country, Canada, where we can get
Yeah,
tested for free.
for
But
free.
there are people in, and
Yeah.
that's not common though. And especially for people in the US who we have a lot of audience members in the US. And
Hmm.
so, keep in mind your financial, aspect to this too, right? Like if you can only afford to do it once a year, but you would like to do it more, okay, but try not to give yourself too much guilt or shame if that's all you can afford to do. Doing it once a year, right? You're gonna, that's better than not doing it at all. That's for sure. 100%.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
so thank you very much for sharing your story and for being so open about it. I can tell one of the things that came up for me as you were sharing your story was is that you you told me about your HSV like on day one, day two, I think it was actually. So yeah,
Hmm.
the first date we had, you told me about it. And one of the questions that we get a lot in the work that we do is when should I tell potential people or
Hmm.
potential partners, if I have an STI? And my answer is always immediately. Do
Yeah.
not wait. Whether like, what if I don't, what if I'm not sexually, what if I don't know if I'm sexually interested in that person? Or what if what if I don't know, right? Well, I'm like, well, what difference does that make? Like if we're trying to work towards a world where we're destigmatizing STIs, then having that
Hmm.
conversation on a first date or in a first texting call or whatever, it shouldn't matter like in that regard. And that's, in fact, I would go so far as to say that's one of the ways that we can help to destigmatize is, hey, this is a part of me. Just like, I have, tattoos. I have an STI that I want you to be aware of. We talk openly about so many things regarding sex now that I think the STI conversation needs to come up as well. Hey, this is what I like. This is what I don't like. This is what I'm into. This is what I'm not into. Oh yeah,
Hmm.
and I also have this, right? Um, this is important stuff to discuss as early as possible. And it's also important to discuss because the person that you're talking to needs that information as soon as possible. Because
Yeah.
they might be like, oh my God, this person is, you're a fantastic human being. And blah, 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 blah. But maybe that's a boundary for them.
Yeah, because it could be that they're immune compromised or they have a partner that's immune compromised. One of the things too is that if someone does disclose to you, check in with them about consent to share with your other partners that they do have that STI. I give consent fully because I want people to talk about it. I want everyone who is involved in, you know, our polycule to know, right? And so that that is not a problem for me, but for some other people it might be. Then it becomes a question of do I feel that my partners are getting enough information, right? So some people will make an agreement with their partner. I will get tested and you will make your decisions accordingly based on my testing results so that I don't have to disclose other people's information that I'm involved with, right? I may never get it. I may never have any symptoms. I may unfortunately be asymptomatic and pass it on, but you know, some people operate that way. And you should get kind of a good idea of where your partner's at in terms of that. Will they be able to disclose someone else's information? Maybe not, right? But will they disclose to you that I have a partner with this without naming names, perhaps? And then you can make your decisions accordingly. For the immune compromised, it doesn't much matter what STIs we're talking about. They're sometimes problematic on many levels. So because their immune system is challenged all the time, introducing another element would be detrimental to them. That's what I know about the folks that I'm involved with who are immune compromised. So for them, it would be a deal breaker. And that is good information to know. I never want to put someone in a position where their health is seriously at risk because they're intimate with me, right? We can want it all we want, but if it's if it's going to put your health at risk, don't do it, right? There's other sort of things that we should be talking about in terms of safer sex as well, because it's not always about sex, right? There's there's a handful of STIs that are transmissible through kissing. So HPV, HSV, which we've already talked about. HPV is the genital warts and can also cause cancer of the uterus generally. And syphilis can be passed along through kissing. I think there's one more. I'll look it up in a second. And yeah, so, you know, we've got to be careful that we're not just thinking this is all about sex, because it's not.
Which is what you were talking about earlier about passing it, transmitting it through like family members and stuff. Like you go to give a family member a kiss on the cheek, right? You could be the most monogamous person in the world, but you never know, right? So
Well,
that's why it's
particularly mouth kissing.
right,
People kiss babies. You know, that
right.
is we've got to stop doing that. We really have to stop doing that. Stop kissing the babies.
Yeah,
I'm serious. There's a
yeah.
virus called Cytomeglovirus that it is very, very harmful to pregnant women and to babies. It is transmissible through, I believe, kissing. I'm just looking that up actually. Um, and cytomegalovirus is generally asymptomatic. Most people have it by the time they're 40 and can resolve on its own and generally have no symptoms. So you wouldn't know that you have it, but it doesn't leave the
So,
body.
so that raises a question. So something
Mhm,
like that, using that as an example,
mhm.
why do you think we should be so aware of that? If it's like if it rarely has symptoms, if it doesn't really impact us, why does it matter?
Because of pregnant women and babies. It causes,
Immunocompromised. Could it
yeah,
be
it
different for
causes,
immunocompromised people too?
I think so. If you were immune compromised, I would encourage you to just generally know that, right? To get educated about it.
Right.
I'm closing another window on my computer, sorry.
Right. But I guess the point is that so some people out there in the world think, well, if like, if herpes is treatable and it's not a big deal, then why are we making such a big deal out of STIs? Why do we
Hmm,
need to even talk about it? Like, why do I need to
yeah.
have protocols in place if it's treatable and it's fine and it doesn't matter? Well, that's all great and wonderful for you, but you don't know how those things are going to impact the people that you're with. And
Hmm.
ultimately, I think that's where what it comes down to, at least for me anyway. Because when I'm, I don't presently have any STIs. I had chlamydia once, I don't know, 8, 10 years ago.
Hmm.
And I got
Me
some
too.
antibiotics. Yeah, I got some antibiotics and it got treated and it was fine.
Hmm.
Right. But just because I don't have them doesn't mean that I don't want to have those conversations, because I know that there's always potential that I could have them. And I also
Hmm.
know that I could have something that I'm not aware of. And so
Right.
I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to be safe, which leads me into the next bit here. Unless there was something else you wanted to talk about because you were looking something up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that yes, cytomeglovirus is transmissible through kissing, so it is in that handful of ones that can be passed along. And herpes for a pregnant woman as well is really important that she knows she has it. Um, and often we don't. And if we have a vaginal sore, we can pass it along to the baby. So yeah, go ahead
All right.
with your next
Yeah,
question.
yeah. So let's move on to protocols. What are some of the things that we can do to minimize risk and create a safer sex environment for us and for our partners and for our partners, etc.?
Yeah, this is the part that is really challenging for most people. Um, I hear all the time, we use condoms, we're safe. And I question further because I asked about oral sex. I asked about oral sex on a vulva. Do you use a dental dam? If not, then you can still get STIs orally, right? And you can still pass them on orally as well. Same with oral sex on a penis, right? Are you using a condom? No, it's not comfortable, but uh, as the giver, I can talk to that. It's not it's not comfortable often, and it's not as much fun, and it doesn't necessarily taste good, but it gives you that sense of clarity around this action. Okay, I am aware that I am not going to be ingesting any fluids this way, right? Dental dam use is a little bit trickier because often people get very wet and it's slippy slidey. And so, having multiple dental dams available to you is a good idea. If you're making your own from a condom, by cutting a condom lengthwise, make sure that they're non-lubricated condoms because otherwise it's too hard to hold on to. That's the other problem with dental dams and covering a vulva is that it's challenging, right? You've got both hands kind of utilized. And so, one of the things that you can do to help your partner do this successfully is if you're the vulva owner, is hold it in place, right? That way they can have balance and access to your body in other ways with their hands and um, gloves. We can use gloves as well. One of the things that, we're unaware of or we don't really talk about is glove usage in terms of like a lot of people will use it for anal, but they won't use it for, fingering a vulva. But we can have HPV warts anywhere on the body and we can pass those on. So any wart is HPV. So once we realize that, we recognize that, okay, I've got a wart on my finger. I don't really want to put that inside someone unless it's covered, right? So get some non-latex, non-powdered gloves and have them handy. Um, be prepared to make some dental dams or use um, uh, vinyl or latex underwear for oral sex if you want safe sex, safer sex, right? If you want to push the dial, right, as far as you can toward the safer end of things. Unfortunately, because people tend to be a little lazy and they don't love how rubber tastes, we have a problem. We have a disconnect here, right? And so be aware of that disconnect. If you have a partner that loves oral sex and does not want to use a barrier, and they have multiple partners or a partner other than you, you're at risk. You're at risk, right? How much risk? Well, it depends on that other partner's sexual history, right? So
That's where we come back to
protocol
the,
wise, yeah, go ahead.
and that's where we come back to the beginning, the sort of the top of the episode, which was that conversations, talk about this stuff. And not only that, but educate yourself so that you understand what risks you're putting yourself into by making these decisions in those moments, right? If you decide that you're going to have some oral on a vulva owner in the moment, and you don't want a dental dam, and you need to be aware of what those risks are in that situation. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me personally, I don't like using dental dams, and I don't like using condoms for oral. So my boundary is that I don't engage in any fluid exchanged activities, sexual activities with anyone until we've been tested. That's just a boundary for me. And is it perfect? No, of course not. Nothing's perfect. Again, the only perfect result is the only perfect thing is to just continue to have sex with yourself. But the reality is that it's better than nothing, and it makes me feel more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And me too,
and
as your partner, right?
right, exactly. And so that's kind of, so we do other things sexually, like we can, mutual masturbation and fondling and playing and stuff, but anything that requires any sort of fluid exchange outside of kissing, any sort of fluid exchange, I don't engage in until I have been tested, until my partner's been tested, and then we've shared those test results with each other. And that's just a boundary
Mm-hmm.
for me. And if he isn't interested in doing that, then we're going to be fundamentally misaligned sexually, and therefore probably going to be more of a platonic relationship than anything.
Yeah, and can we address the testing timing?
Yeah, sure.
So,
It's part of the protocol. Absolutely.
sure, absolutely. So, testing is great. Big believer in testing. Get tested. Um, and recognize that the test is 3 months out of date, not completely accurate, but that's a good sort of way of thinking of it because of the incubation periods of STIs. When we have an incubation period, we have to wait, and we learned a lot about this through COVID. We have to wait a certain amount of time before we may have it show up on a test. You okay? Okay. Everything fine down there? Pulling up your socks? So we
I'm
have,
sick. I need to be ultimate comfort level here.
I know. Thank you for doing this while you're sick. I really appreciate you. Yeah.
Thank you for
Um,
that.
so we have, a variety of different incubation periods. Some are longer than 3 months and some are shorter. And some are kind of like, we don't know. Like HIV. HIV is a big one that people are very concerned about. It is treatable now, and many people live long, healthy lives with HIV and never contract AIDS, which is when your system has been worn down by HIV, and now that you're into an immune deficiency. But HIV has an incubation period of 3 weeks to 3 months. Yes,
I heard somewhere that it was up to 7 years.
I think that's old science. They've got better testing now.
Okay.
Mhm. So, but syphilis is a bugger. It has latency periods or dormant periods where it'll not appear, and it can stay in your system untreated, and you'll have these kinds of you might have a sore that comes up, or you might have the flu-like symptoms that come up, the swollen glands, that kind of thing, but not account for syphilis as a possibility and not get tested for it. And it may not actually give you any symptoms for a couple of decades, which is why testing is such an important integral piece to sexual health, right? That just knowing that I will catch it when it comes up. When it's
Right.
available to me, I will see it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we also need to be aware too that even in the best, like we said, and I know this is, I've repeated this a lot, but I think it bears repeating a lot, is that these are not end all to beat all measures. They are not perfect measures by any means.
Hmm.
But the idea is by doing all of these things, right? Wearing condoms for sex as much as possible, being particular, having these conversations, all of this stuff will create an environment of safer sex, not safe, not
Right.
completely safe, but safer sex. Understand that anytime you engage in sex with anyone, doesn't matter, even the person that you love and care for the most, you are still running a risk because you do not know, right? Maybe like the syphilis thing, maybe you've
Yeah.
been with this person for 4 years, right?
Yeah.
And they had a dormant syphilis infection that
Yeah.
pops up, right? And what do you mean you have syphilis? Well, just because that person has syphilis doesn't mean they got it while in the 4 years that the two of you have been together. And it
Correct.
doesn't mean that they're cheating on you. It just means that it's been dormant for that long. So don't make assumptions about the people that you're with on
Well, and
either spectrum,
and
either
that's
way.
the problem with some of the testing that happens as well for particular STIs, like HSV. It will show antibodies, but it won't show you when you got it, right? So you won't be able to tell. You won't be able to say this is a new thing or an old thing. Um,
So,
Also, let's not forget
oh,
hepatitis is part of this package. There are immunizations out there for A and B, so you can get those. And C is you can't. There's no um, immunization for it. Um, and I believe they are transmissible through saliva, but generally not through kissing. It's more tends to be more in the blood range. So if you had a sore in your mouth and or bleeding gums or something like that, that might be a risk, right? And of course, you can have syphilis and gonorrhea of the throat too. So when we talk about the the kind of scary parts of STIs, it's the awareness of, right? Everybody gets cringy when it's like, what? You can get herpes of the eye? What? Uh, well, yeah. So what happens is, if you have a partner with HSV, don't rub your eyes while you're having sex. Um, just don't do that.
don't
There's a
don't sit on their face.
Yeah, maybe don't sit on their face, or if you do, make sure that their eyes are visible.
Yeah.
Um, and here's the other thing is that when we are talking about things like HPV, for example, there's 30 different strains of HPV, genital warts. They don't all give you warts. Some of them will just give you no symptoms whatsoever, and then suddenly cancer, right? So HPV is a scary one, and rightfully so. People should be nervous about HPV, but at the same time, um, the warts themselves are unsightly, but they are removable, right? So we are not talking about warts that cause cancer. We're generally talking about a strain that causes warts, and then we're talking about a strain that causes cancer. There is an immunization out there for that. They'll tell you that most resolve HPV infections will resolve within a year or two. Yeah.
There is not.
What?
There is or is not an immunization out there for that.
Um, for HPV,
Yeah.
there is
I didn't. I
Gardasil,
what?
and there's one other one I can't remember the name of.
Cool.
Yeah. And so, those are available to you. If you're new to non-monogamy, go get immunized for the things that you can. there's preventative measures. There's even a preventative measure for HIV, which is called PrEP. It's not a one and done kind of situation. So I believe you have to keep taking it. But if you have high risk partners or if you have high risk activity that you want to engage in, take PrEP. It reduces HIV transmission by 90%. So we have things available to us that many people are either not aware of or they're just not accessing. And I would encourage people to access the things that are available to them and at least have them as options. I have heard people say, I'm safe because I'm very discerning about my partners and I only choose educated people. Well, what are they educated in? Is my question. You know, you can have a doctorate degree in something and still not know anything about STI transmission. And I've actually heard that as someone's sort of pitch of how safe they are. And I'm like, this means nothing. The person that I got my HSV from said that, for goodness sakes. Right?
Yeah, right. That's a good point. That's a good point. Um, so I think one of the other things too that we should talk about, and maybe this is sort of where we leave it at this point, is what do what suggestions would you give to people if they should find out that they have an STI?
Right.
So what should they do?
Well, first of all, I would get into a safe space with someone that you can trust, whether that's a counselor, a therapist, a friend, your partner, um, and just kind of process the feelings, have that first initial talk. Sometimes it's easier to have that first initial talk with somebody who's not your partner and deal with some of the shame, deal with some of the guilt, deal with some of the fear first, because they'll have their own that comes up. Yeah.
I think it's important to understand that in regards to destigmatizing STIs, that's a key component here is dealing with your own perception of yourself.
Hmm.
Now that you might be one of those people that is dealing with an STI, whether
Hmm.
it's something that you can take an antibiotic for or whatever. I know that when I got chlamydia, it was chlamydia. It's pretty harmless on the scale of things, but I still had some shame, right? And
Sure.
so dealing with that and becoming comfortable with that part of yourself and acknowledging that part of yourself is critical to being able to create hold safe spaces for other people and normalize the process of treatment and normalize the process of treating STIs.
Mm. Yeah, the treatment and management, sure. And also, you know, when we're talking about this process, don't take very long. Do not take your time. When I say go somewhere and process the guilt and shame, I mean like do it that same day, get on the phone that night. Because what we don't want to do is have our partners behaving in ways that they think they're okay to do, um, without getting tested first or without any kind of knowledge that this is a possibility, that they might have it, that they've been exposed to it. They may have an immune suppressed partner who, you know, would be harmed by them behaving normally with them, right? So please don't take your time with that. Do your diligence, your due diligence for yourself ongoing from that point forward. But, you know, at that point, we really do need to disclose. I feel very strongly about that. Even the things that we say are no big deal, part of the problem is the no big deal approach creates transmission opportunities, right? And thus our high numbers. So we really need to do our best to get it known, to our partner or partners. If you feel that your partner is going to react badly, maybe you're in a monogamous relationship and you feel that your partner will have an adverse reaction, I would recruit someone that you trust to be there with you. Or I would ask them to go with you to the doctor to have that conversation, so that you have an ally and they're there with you and you're not in a space where you feel unsafe. Also, if you feel unsafe with a partner, have an exit strategy. This is a big conversation for many people, right? And even if you yourself have a very accepting and tolerant view of STIs, and you don't hold judgment against yourself, and you don't hold it up as a overwhelming issue personally, somebody else may feel very differently. To them, it may feel life changing. It may feel debilitating. It may feel like it steals something from them in terms of their freedom. There's all kinds of complicated feelings that come up after disclosure. So, be mindful of that. It's a good opportunity maybe to, again, invite maybe a counselor or coach to be present for that conversation so that you're able to work out some of those feelings together, because they're all understandable, right? Um, I know when I received my diagnosis, I was very upset, and I was under a lot of personal stress at the time. So I was having very challenging outbreaks. And typically with HSV, it starts pretty hardcore if it's going to come up at all, and then kind of goes down over the years. I'm still on antivirals though, right? And I am very careful about any symptoms. If I have symptoms, I abstain. I think that's a good idea moving forward. If you feel like you're coming down with the flu, maybe this isn't the greatest time to have sex, because that is a foundational symptom for so many STIs, right? So just stop, make an appointment, have a chat with a doctor, or go to the STI clinic and get checked, right?
Right.
I know I'm saying
Yeah.
right a lot. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, listeners.
You are right. All right. Well, I think that's everything that we wanted to cover today. Is there anything that we missed?
I don't think so. Um, you know, I guess the takeaway from this is, as sexual beings, we're just moving through a jungle where we're going to have encounters. And we need to decide for ourselves how to protect ourselves by having good boundaries. Oh, there's one. For example, I won't engage with somebody who's had a new partner if they haven't seen uh, a test result where I'm going to have fluid exchange with them, right? So they have a new partner, they didn't see their test result. So I won't engage where there's any fluid exchange for 3 months until they've been tested again. And that might be longer than 3 months. So say they just had a test, right? And so I'm going to wait another 3 months from that point. And if there's another new partner introduced and the same thing happens, it continues. And so for me, my default is to use condoms with my partners who have other partners. And that way I know that's my boundary, right? Like that's for my safety. That's what I can do. And I use it for oral as well. That way I feel protected. Ironically, even though I have HSV, I rarely have a partner who wants to use a barrier on me, even though I offer. And for those people who really are uncomfortable with male condoms or condoms on a penis, there is a female condom or a intervaginal condom. So, it sits inside the vagina rather than external. And, that's an option too. They're not very common, but I just saw someone post about it the other day. They're like, I love them. And I'm like, that is very cool. I love that too. So some people feel like it's less constricting to the penis and feels more like, because it has lubrication on the inside, feels more like a natural experience. I don't know. But I've tried it before, and it was not a bad experience. It didn't really matter to me, but I think it was not so much fun on the other end. Yeah. So for that person, but that's the thing. Explore, experiment, try it. It might be kind of neat, to put on those latex panties and have oral sex. Could be a thing. You don't know yet.
Thing.
You haven't tried it.
To be a kink, and you don't know until you try.
That's right.
Something else too, I guess maybe we could leave it at this, is that if somebody does share with you that they have an STI, please don't be an asshole.
Right.
Yeah,
Come
just
from it from a
even
place
if
of
it's not
compassion.
something that, yeah, even if it's not something that you're comfortable with, or you need to make decisions that end the relationship because of your boundaries or whatever, just don't be a dick about it. Don't be a jerk. Just
Hmm.
be kind. Like it's not like, anybody wakes up tomorrow and says, "Oh, gee, I think I want to have an STI today." It doesn't happen that way. These are things that we have to
No.
function with and live with and move through the world with. And we don't know people's stories. So if somebody's sharing this information with you on a first date and it's just not something that you're comfortable with, just be kind. Don't be a
Hmm.
fucking dick. Seriously. I mean, I hear a lot of women, especially women, say that they're afraid to tell potential partners about STIs that they have or have had because of the reactions that they get. And so just
Potential male partners primarily.
potential male partners, yeah, it happens with female or it happens with, yeah, it's not necessarily gender specific, but it does seem to primarily happen with male partners. But yeah, just be kind
Yeah.
about it,
You know
right?
why? Because it could happen to you.
Yeah.
And
It could be happening to you in the
it,
moment and you don't know,
yeah,
right?
it
Like
could be you
maybe
next week coming back to them going, "Oh God, I got tested and look what I found."
and,
Right?
maybe you're being an asshole about it because you're afraid of it, and that's okay. You can be afraid of it. That's fine.
Yeah.
If that's your work and you need to do that and that's where you're at, that's fine. But don't don't put that fear on somebody else. Don't shame or stigmatize other people because of your own fears.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it comes to choosing partners, choose partners that are willing to have those conversations, where you actually feel that they are forthcoming and willing, right? Um, Even if there's nothing to disclose up front, it's a good idea to just, you know, have you have awareness when you're meeting someone, as you're getting to know them. Are they comfortable with these talks, or are they starting to sweat and get uncomfortable and look like they want to leave? You know, um, I can't be with somebody who's not willing to have that conversation with me, obviously, for my own reasons. And I find, generally speaking, that people are becoming more aware in the community, but there's more work to be done. Yeah.
Absolutely. And speaking of more work to be done, there's one more thing I wanted to mention. It just occurred to me actually, and that is that let's say you have a partner and you break up with that partner, and then you go get tested a month, 2 months, or 3 months later, and you find out that you do indeed have an STI. You you I invite you to consider letting that ex-partner that you broke up with know that, because that could impact them as well. Now, obviously, they're going to be not obviously, hopefully they're going to be getting tested on their own, but it's still a good idea to at least shoot them a quick message just saying, heads up, I've got this infection. It might impact you. I don't know, but I just thought I'd make you aware of
Yeah, and I think in a lot of places it's the
it.
law.
If it's safe to do that,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
yeah. So I think,
So it'll go
yeah.
ahead.
So if you're aware of that you have an STI and you've been with somebody in the last 3 months and you're no longer with them, you still might want to consider letting them know that.
Hmm. Hmm.
All right. Unless there's anything else.
I was just looking to see what the legalities are. I think it might not be federal legislation, it might be provincial here in Canada. So
Yeah,
legalities around disclosing in Canada, it's a crime not to disclose HIV or another STI before having sex that poses a significant risk of serious bodily harm. And that hardly of any of the court cases have been about other STIs. It's primarily HIV because of that bodily harm piece. But if someone is immune compromised, right, they could sue you for sure. And I think it's different depending on where you live. So
yeah. So check your local laws.
but
You know, see what.
also just do the right thing. Just do the
Yeah,
right thing. Just do it.
for sure, for sure. And it'll go a long way to help destigmatizing as well, like we talked about before. So just
Yeah.
being
And
transparent.
like HPV, when I called about getting immunized about that, the nurse on the STI line was saying, you don't have to worry about that. You're in your 50s. And I'm like, I want to worry about it because she's saying, I've been exposed. I've been exposed to multiple strains probably many times because of the number of partners I've had, because it's so prevalent, right? That may be true, but I'm still going to take the precaution. If it's offered to me and I'm able to, I'm still going to do that for me and for my partners, right? If there's anything that I can do to make it safer, I will. And that's how I feel about it. So
Awesome. Well, thank you for carrying the load on this particular episode. I appreciate you.
thanks.
You're definitely a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this stuff. It's also important to acknowledge and note that you are not a doctor, you are not a
Correct.
health professional, you are not a
Correct.
nurse in any way, shape, or form. This is all based on personal experience, personal research.
Yeah.
So please don't take anything that we have said as professional advice or medical advice or anything else. This is just simply our experiences with this and our interpretation of the best way to create a safer sex environment for you and your partners. So I think that's it. I think that's everything. I think we covered everything we wanted to cover today.
Yeah. Great topic.
So yeah, it's a great topic. And yeah, so let us know if there's anything in the comments, reach out to us if there's any questions, if there's anything that any feedback that you have for us, anything that we might have missed, because I'm sure we did, anything that we might have gotten incorrect or inaccurate according to your own research, please, let's have a conversation about this. This is very important. Like we said, we don't know everything. We're just
we don't know
sharing
what we don't know, right?
yeah, exactly. And we want to know. And so let's have a conversation about it. So we welcome anybody who wants to reach out and have a dialogue about it and share their experiences and their perspectives and stuff. So yeah, please do so. So, all right. So without
right.
further ado, choose love
and keep it kind.
We'd love to hear your comments, questions, or topic suggestions. And don't forget to subscribe.
And you're invited to join our Facebook group, Empowered Poly Relationship Support and Advice.
You can reach out to us on our websites at gregmillion.com
and at leannemillion.com,
or follow us on Instagram at @thegregmillion
and at Leanne Million.